Hi. So I have received a comment from Cubing Kid, who has a really cool username by the way. And the comment says, "Can you make a video on how to add momentum to the spawned objects and how to spawn them at a specific game object?" So it's made a turret that can look and follow the player, but it needs to shoot, it needs to spawn a bullet at a specific location in front of the turret. So they've made a turret that can look and follow the player, and the turret should spawn a bullet in front of the turret, and we should make the bullet move, if that makes sense. And when the bullet is spawned, it should move towards the player. So that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. In terms of spawning, we're going to do things in two ways. In the first way, we're going to learn how to spawn a game object at the current location of a particular game object, which is the most ideal solution out of the two. And in the second way, we're going to learn how to spawn a game object at a location of another game object. I already have a video on how to spawn game objects where we talk about the instantiate function a lot, so make sure to check that out. So I'll give you a preview of what we're going to make. So you have a player and the turret will start shooting the player. If the player goes out of range, the turret will stop shooting, and once the player comes back in range, the turret will just start shooting again. So let's dive right in. So I've already set up a simple scene here with a player that can move around and a turret that always tries to face the player when the player comes in range. So the player can move around and the turret will always try to face the player until the player goes out of range, and when the player comes back in, the turret faces the player once again. So if you're interested in the code of the player, I just simply get two horizontal inputs, and at start I get the rigid body, and at fixed update I update the velocity based on the two inputs, and then I multiply it by the speed and time.fixed delta time. And for the turret, it's a little bit more complicated. I have the turret range and the rotation speed, and I find the player at start, and on update I check if the player is in range. If it is in range, then I'll do all of this, which just rotates the turret towards the player. So now let's get to the real deal, where we'll spawn a projectile from the turret. Alright, so the first thing we need is a location to spawn. So I have the turret prefab. I will extend it till the turret gun. I'll right click and create an empty game object, and then I'll name it turret gun point, and I'll just move it to the edge of the turret. To make it a lot more visible, I'll select here and then select a symbol icon to make it visible. So it's on the edge of the turret, and I will simply go to the prefab and then apply the changes so that it gets affected on the turret prefab. So the next step is to create a bullet. So I'll create a folder called weapons. I'll create another folder inside and call it projectiles. On the scene, I'll create a 3D object, which is going to be a cube. I'll call this projectile 1. I'll scale it down. I will then create a prefab of the projectile. I'll delete this. So we have a basic projectile to be spawned. And the next step is to create code for it. So I'll right click, create a C# script. I will call this gun. And we could actually put all these logic in the turret class, but it makes sense to create a separate gun class which we can then reuse on other guns. For example, if the player has a gun, it makes sense to centralize or encapsulate all the gun logic into a single class and then use it inside the turret. But the turret will not control how the gun would work. The turret would just control the direction in which it faces. And I hope that makes sense. Inside the gun, I'll just get rid of start and update. And let's start creating some variables. We'll start off with the actual projectile for the gun. So I'll create a serialized field, game object, and it's going to be projectile. And the reason why we want to use serialized field is because if we make it public, other classes will be able to access this. Because we're using a serialized field, it makes this particular field visible in the inspector. I'll show you what I mean. So if you go to the gun point and then add the script, we can see that a field appears for the projectile. It works similar to that public, but it is still private. which makes sense because the player shouldn't be able to change the projectile of the gun, but only the gun should be able to change its projectile, if that makes sense. And another thing is a rate of fire. So I'll create another serialized field, float rate of fire, and I'll just give it 1f, so it will shoot every single second. And then inside this class I'll simply create a public function called fire, and inside this what we'll do is we'll call instantiate, and we'll provide the projectile, and for the position we'll give the position of the gun point, so transform.position, and for the rotation it should actually match the rotation of the turret, so we'll give transform.rotation. I hope this will work, but we won't be calling it inside the gun script, but we'll be calling this function over in the turret. And fire just simply spawns the projectile. It doesn't add any momentum, or it doesn't add any force onto the projectile. So the projectile should be a simple entity on its own, so it should be able to add force on itself rather than letting the gun do the hard work for it. So in order to do the logic, we actually need to get the gun over here. So let's make a private gun called current gun, and at start we're going to say current gun equals get component in children gun, and here we could call current gun dot fire, but this will be called every frame, so it doesn't make sense to put this directly inside the update loop without putting a timer or something. So let's create a simple timer over here. So to create a timer, we'll just create a float called fire rate, and we'll have another float called fire rate delta, and at start we'll get fire rate equals current gun dot fire rate, but fire rate cannot be accessed because it is private. So we'll be creating a simple getter which is going to be of the same return type as of the data type of the variable. So it's going to have the return type of float, and we'll call it get rate of fire, and inside it will just simply return rate of fire. Since this is a public function, we'll be able to call it from the turret. So we'll set fire rate equals current gun dot get rate of fire. So this will have a value which is going to be default 1 in this case, and over here if fire rate delta is less than or equal to 0, then simply call current gun dot fire, and we will set fire rate delta as fire rate. Before this we'll simply say fire rate delta minus equals time dot delta time. Initially fire rate delta will be less than 0, so it will fire it, and once we fire it we set it back to fire rate, which is going to be 1, and then this condition will not be true, so it will not fire until fire rate delta gets subtracted till it reaches a value less than 0, and then it will call fire once again. So that's how we call a timer. So let's see if it works. So I'll go to the gun point, and we have a projectile. We'll just drag in a projectile, and if we play the game, so it is spawning a cube every 1 second, which is cool. And that's about it for the spawning. So it currently uses the gun point's position. If we have to use another object's position, just like you mentioned in the video, so the way we're going to do that is we're going to specify another transform called gun point. Let's say since it's a serialized field, we will get a field over here, so then we can just simply drag and drop this into the gun point. Another way to do this would be to create another script called gun point and just simply make it empty, but let it inherit from mono behavior. Close the script, and on the gun point simply attach the gun point script, and over on the gun at start we can set gun point as get component in children of type gun point, and then assign the transform of that particular component. So this way you will get the gun point, and instead of transform dot position we're going to say gun point dot position, and this would work. I'm just going to undo all of that changes because I feel like it's better to spawn it by setting the gun logic to the gun point. We can just avoid this transform variable within itself. So it's just a tiny optimization, and I like to do things this way. I will just remove the component and then I'll delete this. And now for the part where we actually add momentum, or move the projectile. For that, let's just create a C# script called projectile. I will open it in Visual Studio, and we'll need some variables, right? We'll create a serialized field, float, projectile speed would be one thing. So if you pause the game and you set the pivot handle rotation to local, you can see that we'll always have to move the object at its forward axis. So it's the Z axis that we want to move the bullet. So we'll simply call update, and we'll simply call transform.translate, and here we'll go new vector 3. In the x-axis is going to be 0, y-axis is going to be 0, and on x-axis is going to be projectile speed times time.delta time. So we'll also give a default value of 5, and on the projectile prefab we'll simply add this projectile script. I'll save, and then you can see that the projectile shoots towards the player. I'll just open this and set it to something like 15, and now if I play it, you can see that the bullet travels a lot faster compared to the player, and if we go away, it does not shoot anymore until we come in range, which is exactly the thing that we want. So this is how we do it. If you have different types of projectiles, you could actually change the way you do things. Since this is simple translation, I did not even assign a rigid body to the projectile. In case of collisions, the player will have a rigid body, so we will still get collision events even though the projectile doesn't have a rigid body. So since this is simple translation, we don't actually need a rigid body. So if we have to add a force, we need to use a rigid body. So we'll go to the projectile and then add a rigid body. I'll just simply freeze the rotation constraints, and the way we're going to do it here is going to be simply creating a rigid body field. Let's call it RB, and at start we're going to say RB equals get component rigid body, and this simply gets this particular component on the game object in which this class is attached to. We don't actually need to call update. Instead, we simply create a function called impulse or something, and over here we're just gonna say rigid body dot add force. We need to specify a direction in which the force is going to be applied. It's going to be the forward vector of the projectile. We'll say transform dot forward, and we're going to multiply it with the projectile speed, and we're going to specify a force mode as well, which is going to be force mode dot impulse, and we'll call this at start when we actually spawn the projectile. Another thing to mention is that the projectile speed should be of higher value, so keep it to something like 500. So let's go to the game, and you can see that the turret shoots projectiles at us. Whee! And when we come back in range, it shoots back again. So that's how you do it. And that's it for this video. I hope it was useful to you in some ways. If you're facing any errors in this video, please make sure to let me know in the comments so that I can help you in dealing with it. If you have any other video suggestions, make sure to let me know, just like how CubingKit did over here, so that I can make videos on it. And it really motivates me a lot. And if you have any tips or any suggestions, please do let me know in the comments. Apologies for not posting videos recently. I got a lot busy, and life just got in the way. And that's it. Take care. See you. Bye bye.